Okay guys, well in this video I'm going to address the fallacy of the poles melting and global warming causing sea level rises. Now, what we are told is that due to the poles melting, the sea levels are rising, and this is why some of these Pacific islands are experiencing a loss of land, is because the sea level is rising, and this is due to human behaviour causing the global temperatures to increase, and in turn the poles are melting and the sea levels are rising and reclaiming land. Now, the problem with that theory is that the Antarctic is actually gaining ice. Now, this article is from NASA and was published in October last year. And studies are showing that they are still seeing that the ice sheet is gaining more ice than it is losing. And so we see that there's a problem already in this theory that the poles are melting and therefore this is causing sea level rise. Now, the Arctic is showing signs of changes, and some of those changes are that there are areas that are losing ice, and this is increasing and has been increasing over the last few years. But as we can see, this is not happening on both poles, okay, because we're seeing the Antarctic actually gaining more ice than it's losing. Now, the other issue that I have with this global warming, melting the poles and causing the sea levels to rise is that this should be uniform. So if we have a pool and we are filling the pool with water, do we see some areas of the pool gain more water than other areas of the pool? No, we see it rise in a uniform manner. And so if the poles were melting and we were seeing the sea levels rising, then we would be experiencing the sea level rising in a uniform way across the planet, and all of the countries would be measuring some changes to the land that was being reclaimed by the oceans, and this is not the case. We are mainly seeing sea level rising apparently happening over in these Pacific islands like Vanuatu, the Solomon Islands, and over here in Indonesia, which is being affected the most by their land being reclaimed by the ocean. Now, this is actually because these islands are sinking. They are on a tectonic plate that is soon to go underneath the oceans, while the other plates move above the oceans, because this is a mechanism we see happening through our cycle continuously. And this is where the stories of Atlantis have come from, because this happens halfway through the cycles when these tectonic plates shift again and huge areas of the planet move below the oceans and other areas are pushed up above the oceans. And so we can actually see that there's even studies done. Now, this was done by a French research team of the Pacific Islands, where they are actually measuring shifts in the tectonic plates that are causing these islands to sink. And so I will actually post this article underneath and you can read this in full. Now, we're also seeing other evidence of these tectonic shifts now taking place. We have an island that has just been created off the coast of the UK. Now, you will not see this information appear anywhere in the mainstream media. This island that's just been created off the coast of the UK was seen on the 10th of May 2016. This is when the article was published. And so we're yet to see the mainstream media actually address this. And so far, what we have been told is they don't understand why this is happening. Same reason that Beijing is sinking. They don't understand why this is happening, but they are blaming that the groundwater being pumped out to provide water for citizens is one of the reasons that Beijing is sinking. However, when you actually look where Beijing is located, you can see that this area is very unstable, okay? Beijing's around here, this is Japan, okay? And so we can see that Japan is on the edge of this plate here. We've got Beijing around here, and so we are seeing this plate here starting to sink. And this is causing all of these anomalies to basically happen where they are seeing the land sinking. And of course they can't tell anybody that this is the case, because then they'd have mass panic. They have to blame things like pumping groundwater is the cause of Beijing sinking. Now, we're also seeing a slow slip earthquake that's been detected off New Zealand over the last few months. And again, New Zealand is right on the edge of this plate. When you look where this plate actually goes, you can see that New Zealand is right on the edge, and this is why we see a lot of strong earthquakes and a lot of volcanic activity also happening around these areas. Lakes and rivers are suddenly starting to mysteriously disappear. Again, this is because we're seeing these changes in these tectonic plates shifting, and the groundwater is shifting and moving and being drained away. Now, I don't know the absolute mechanism of how this all occurs. I can just show you what the evidence is basically bringing as part of the picture, and this is that there are huge changes going on with our tectonics. We've got the Lassen Peak over in California sinking. They don't know why. They don't know why this is happening. Again, these changes are happening very slowly, but when the big shift does occur, it will happen very violently and very quickly. And so we are being readied for this. This is why we need to be preparing and observing our surroundings and our environment so that we can understand that the planet is readying herself for these huge shifts, if that is the way that you want to basically see it, that these changes are happening because this is all in preparation for this huge shift that the planet is about to go through. Now, we were left information about this. Aristotle said that all earthquakes and disasters are warnings. There's too much corruption in the world. Now, this is because he knew that we were in a cycle, and when we came to the end of that cycle in the Iron Age, that's when all of these shifts would start causing earthquakes and disasters. And this was also a time when mankind were corrupted, and basically we are at the end of the cycle even on a conscious level. We have descended consciously and spiritually as well as physically, because remember, when you are applying hermetics to all of this research and all of this information, you have to understand that things happen on 3 levels: physically, spiritually, and mentally. And so this is why whenever you look at something, you have to apply this to those 3 levels. And so when we're seeing all of these earthquakes and disasters happening on our planet and increasing, then this also translates to a spiritual and conscious level, because we have also fallen into a state of corruption. And look at our planet. We have corrupted her as well. She is being poisoned. She is being destroyed. There is basically a garbage truck full of plastic being dumped into our oceans every minute. Our oceans are just full of plastic. The plastic has broken down into microscopic particles, and all of the fish have these particles within their flesh. So we are basically ingesting poison when we are eating any seafood now. This is what we've done to our planet, because we have moved into a state of consciousness where we are very corrupted, and we do worship materialism and money and greed above all else. So we're destroying our planet because of little pieces of paper that we believe have value. But really, when you look at this in a logical way, they're just little pieces of paper. We've attributed value to these pieces of paper. They don't really have value. It's just that we perceive them as having value, and we're using this perception of these pieces of paper having value to destroy our planet. And this is because we're corrupted. This is because we are no longer conscious spiritual beings. We just worship the flesh, and we just worship our physicality and materialism, because that's the only way we can now perceive ourselves. That's the only way we can understand ourselves. Now, Helena Blavatsky also warned of these changes. She went on to say that we are at the close of the cycle of 5,000 years of the present Aryan Kali Yuga, or Dark Age. This will be succeeded by an age of light, the Golden Age. Even now, under our very eyes, the new races, or race, are preparing to be formed, and that is in America, that their transformation will take place and has already silently commenced. Now, she's talking about the divine race and the divine races, because the races within the divine race are white, black, red, and yellow. So all of this arguing about whether Jesus was black or Jesus was white is ridiculous, because there is more than one Jesus. Jesus is just the symbol. He's just the avatar. It's the symbol for the avatar of the firstborn divine male. And so Jesus has brothers, and they are of all the races. And so you can't see Jesus as a person, as a persona, because it's just the name of the avatar that the spirit or soul of Jesus basically inhabits during each incarnation. And so what the Vatican have done is sought to create a persona around this symbolism of the avatar, to create an idol, to create something for their flock to worship, and basically they are dragging them down into the ditch, because this was warned against. Because when you are just idol worshipping, you are not really conscious of the truth behind the Christ within mankind, which each and every one of us carry within us. It's just that everything happens in degrees, and so the divine race has a closer connection to source, and that's why they are divine in nature more so than mortals. It's all about the creation process. And so it's nothing that's this holy, spiritual, ceremonial subject that the churches have turned it into. This is just creation. This is just nature. This is just the mechanism of the soul created in the physical form, in physicality. So what the Vatican have actually done is take people away from the truth by creating temples and churches and making it something so grand that people think that they don't actually live up to godliness or to being worth that ideal. And this is how they control the consciousness of mankind, by giving them that perception. So you have to understand that there's a divine element within mankind, a divine race, and they are ignorant to themselves at this time of the cycle also. And it's only when the illumination is upon mankind once again that they will know who they are, and then they will basically take ownership of their place upon creation. But until this time, these divine beings are just as the mortals are. And so it's very interesting that Helena Blavatsky addresses this. She absolutely understood that we were in a constant cycle, and that this cycle elevated us in forms of consciousness, in forms of our physical nature, as well as our spiritual nature, because it all fuses together, and something can't only happen on one level. So if people say that the Christ is only a form of consciousness, it's just Christ consciousness, well, then they're not actually addressing Christ consciousness in the physical, and they're not actually addressing Christ consciousness in the spiritual. So you have to actually bring it down to all of those planes, and so it plays out on each of those three planes, and then we can understand that Christ consciousness is talking about the spiritual aspect of those who are created closer to source and therefore were known as divine. Now, she keeps going on to say that the race will be all altered in mentality, so consciously illuminate, because again, this all starts through the mental illumination. It's only when we understand ourselves correctly and consciously in the right way that we can actually move ourselves out of physicality, because we have an understanding that we're spiritual beings. We're not physical beings that have to show our worth by going to work every day, having a successful career, having a huge bank balance to show our worth to the world. We know that when we're a spiritual being, that does not actually count for anything. It's what's inside. And when you can actually see yourself in the correct way, you can move away from that physicality that we've been trapped into, because we've been made to believe that everything's all about materialism and the acquiring material things to make us worth more, when in actual fact you want to remove material thinking from your existence. You want to lessen materialism in your life and move back towards yourself, your real self, which is your soul, which is your spiritual consciousness and who you are first and foremost. Now then she goes on to say that there's a periodical sinking and reappearance of the mighty continents, now called Atlantean and Lemurian by modern writers. It is not fiction and will be demonstrated. It is only in the 20th century that portions, if not the whole, of the present work will be vindicated. A world destruction has happened to Atlantis 11,000 years ago, the Silver Gate. Instead of Atlantis, all of England and parts of northwestern European coast will sink into the sea. In contrast, the sunken Azores region, the Isle of Poseidonus, will again be raised from the sea. And so basically she even identifies that halfway through the cycle we see this change. Now, some say 11,000 years, some say 13,000 years, because if you actually acknowledge the precession, that it changes the length of the great year. I say 26,000 years because to me that just makes it easier to work out all of the different timing within the ages. So when you say 11,000 years, you're actually including the precession in your calculations. Now, we also had Edgar Cayce warning that a portion of Japan will go under the sea and the upper portion of Europe will be changed as in the twinkling of an eye. So again, showing that it's going to happen very quickly. You know, the earth will be broken up in the western portion of America. This is something that our planet goes through constantly. And so what we're now seeing is an indication that these changes are actually beginning to accelerate. And they are just using the myth of global warming and sea level rises to hide this truth from mankind. And so people will just be blindsided when these huge shifts happen. But when these shifts do occur, it is going to be something that is accompanied by huge volcanic activity, huge earthquakes. So we will just see a continued escalation in the severity of earthquakes. They're going to continue getting stronger. We're going to continue seeing more earthquakes around these areas in the Pacific where the island nations are, the Solomons, Vanuatu. I mean, we see Vanuatu, it's very, very tectonically active around this area. So all we can do is really just be aware of what's approaching, and again, it's just preparing ourselves on all those levels, you know, physically, spiritually, and mentally. And as I always say, it's like the spiritual and mental aspect that you really need to embrace, because when these changes are happening, you really don't want to fall into this sense of hopelessness and confusion and chaos, because that's where the masses are going to be. You don't want to be part of the hive mind when they are absolutely losing control because they have no understanding of what's happening to them. You, however, will understand that there was information left for us to prepare for these huge tectonic shifts that we could expect to happen at different times of the cycle. And it happens halfway through the cycle of the great year, and it's also going to happen as we move back into the golden age. And we can actually see this like a golden mean spiral. This is a good way to look at how the cycle moves. And so halfway through, we've got the silver age, and this is why I call it the silver gate, because this is where these big shifts happen. And then we start descending down the silver age, and the divine element in mankind basically begins to fade because the light fades, and therefore the divinity within mankind becomes less apparent, and continues on until we're in the Iron Age. And this is where the divine nature within mankind, these divine beings, are just as if mortals were also, you know, they have no difference. They are as if they are mortals in these times. And it's only when we move back into the golden age that we once again identify the divine nature within our species, this divine element. And so 0 point is basically the apocalypse or the Ragnarok, where the veil shifts and there's like a transitional point which happens for a short period of time. The Hopi even speak of this, where it's a dropping of the veils, where the ethereal and the physical meet for a short while, and then we move back into the golden age to begin the cycle once again. So anyway, I will post everything underneath, and you can have a look at all of those articles for yourself, and I'll leave it here. And as always, peace out.